It began to snow before noon. Large, heavy flakes fell on the roof of the cabin, covering it as if it were a shroud. The wind howled between the pines, and the draught blew through the cracks in the walls, chilling her to the bone. Anna clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders and cradled one of the babies, a girl with a tiny nose and blonde hair like her late husband's. The second child, a boy, slept in a cradle woven from willow, tiny fists clenched. Anna was young, only 28, but her face bore the marks of fatigue, like a woman who had seen too much. 6 months ago, she and John had come to this land on a settlement program, 60 acres if you built a house and survived the winter. John was sure he could do it. He was the kind of man who didn't doubt. She loved him for that, for his strength, for his confidence. But things had gone wrong. He didn't return from the hunt. Then they found only his rifle, bloody, and footprints covered by the snowstorm. Anna was left alone. Already then, in the 2nd month of pregnancy, she realized that there was nowhere to go back to. There were no relatives left, and her neighbors, if you can call them that, were 200 miles away, in a settlement on the other side of the river. The men who had helped John build the house had promised to return with firewood and salt. They had promised 3 weeks ago. Anna wrapped pieces of burlap around her legs to keep her warm. The stove was barely smouldering. There was only enough wood left for 24 hours, maybe less. She couldn't leave, not with 2 babies in her arms. Every breath was labored. The air was as cold and dry as ash. In the corner lay the last piece of cornbread, mouldy but still edible. She looked out the window. There was nothing to be seen beyond the frost, just a white void. Before, when John had been around, the blizzard had seemed romantic to her. Now it felt like a judgment. She took the boy in her arms, held him to her chest, and cried quietly. Not in her voice, quietly, the way mothers cry when they don't want to frighten their children. Night was falling fast. She put both children in the cradle, covering them with everything she had, her old coat, her shawl, even her flour sack. Then she sat down by the stove, tossed the last chips into the fire, and hugged her knees. She knew that if no one came, they would not wake up in the morning. And yet there was a tiny spark in his heart. Not hope, no, just instinct, like a cornered she-wolf. She must make it through one more day, one more night. The blizzard continued for a 3rd day. The air in the hut was getting drier and colder. Anna woke to loud crying. The girl, her daughter, was writhing in the blanket, waving her fists in the air. The boy was wheezing, his chest heaving up and down intermittently. Anna leaned her palm against her son's forehead, feverish. Her heart clenched. It flashed through her mind. If one of them gets sick, she won't be able to save the other. And that meant both of them. The water ran out. To water the children, she used to drown the snow in a tin mug directly on the remains of the coals. Sometimes the snow had sand or pine needles in it, but she didn't care. The main thing was to have at least a warm sip. Breast milk was almost gone. Her body was exhausted, and her food had run out 2 days ago. Only cornbread, broken off in crumbs, and a couple grains of beans left at the bottom of the sack. She carried the children one by one in her arms, trying to keep them warm with her body. Every scream, every cough echoed in her head like a hammer. Time flowed not by hours, but by breaths. 1. You are alive. The 2nd, you are still with them. The 3rd, silence again. One night, when the darkness was so thick you could touch it with your hands, the ceiling timber in the hut cracked. The damp wood failed and splintered, bringing part of the roof and the snow mass inside. Anna cried out, covering the cradle with her chest. A splinter scratched her shoulder, blood dripping onto the floor. Crouching in a corner, she sat with the babies wrapped in an old shawl. The walls creaked under the pressure of the wind, as if the hut were about to collapse. She felt that unless a miracle happened, it would all end tonight. By morning, her face was numb with cold. The snow inside the hut lay in drifts. The boy coughed, hoarsely, with a painful whoosh. Anna stood up, shakily. She went to the door. She opened it and was immediately hit by a barrage, a white wall. She screamed into the void. "Somebody, help me, please!" Only the wind answered her. merciless, icy. She closed the door and pressed her back against it. John's hat lay at her feet. She picked it up, squeezed it as if he were near. Then she sat down on the floor, holding the children tightly, and whispered, "I won't let you die. I'll burn everything, but you'll live." And she began to dismantle the table, thick legs, planks, anything that could burn, into the furnace. She looked one last time at the framed pictures, John smiling, and she still with her rounded belly. Then she gritted her teeth and threw the frame into the fire. The flames soared, illuminating Anna's face. It wasn't the face of a victim. It was the face of a warrior. On the other side of the forest, a few days' journey from Anna's hut, a tall man with bronze skin and an incisor-sharp gaze walked through the snowdrifts. His name was Takwai, a name that meant silent wind. He was a hunter and warrior of the Comanche tribe, formerly a warrior, now an outcast. He had long ago left his clan after a bloody conflict with young chiefs who chose to trade with the whites. Takwai didn't believe in trading, only in the land, in hunting and strength. He wandered the north, avoiding towns, avoiding villages, but sometimes he couldn't pass by what his heart dictated. Footprints, barely visible, leading deep into the woods. Not deer, not wolf. The tracks of a woman, and two more, very small, almost dots. Children's. They weren't common in this place. He froze, listening. The wind carried pain. He followed the trail all day, then another night. Snow covered the trail, but he could feel the direction. He knew how to follow a scent, a broken branch, a faint fingerprint on a tree trunk. He knew the sounds of fear. Toward morning, he came to the edge of the forest, and there, through the veil of the snowstorm, he saw a black silhouette. A hut, a shack, hobbled, half buried in snow. At the door, footprints leading inside. He heard the cry of a baby, faint, almost animal-like. Takwai walked over and knocked 3 times. Silence. He pushed the door open. It gave in with a wheeze, and snow rushed in. Anna stood by the stove, holding a knife. Her face was grey with cold, her lips chapped, but her eyes were alive, wary, almost wild. "Who are you?" she wheezed. "Go away." Takwai didn't move. His gaze travelled around the room. The cradle, the children, a smoking table sawn into firewood. He stepped forward and raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not the enemy. Saw the smoke. Heard the screams. Are you alone?" Anna didn't answer. Then her body trembled. She took a step, but her legs gave out. Takwai caught her before she fell. "Children," she whispered before she lost consciousness. Takwai laid her down by the fire, carefully, like a sister. Then he walked over to the children. Their skin was cold, but they were breathing. He stripped off his buffalo hide and wrapped the babies. Then he took up the task. Start a fire, reinforce a wall, cover a hole in the roof. He worked silently, quickly. When everything was ready, he looked at the woman again. She was asleep, but in her sleep her fingers were clenched, as if still struggling. He knew that this winter was not over, but now they were not alone. It had been 3 days since Takwai had entered the hut. Anna woke up warm, her body covered in skins, a fire crackling nearby, and someone feeding her a spoonful of hot herbal infusion. The taste was bitter, but scaldingly alive. "Where are the children?" she asked hoarsely, her lips barely parted. "Sleeping." "I'm right here," a low voice answered. It was only then that she noticed the figure against the wall, a silhouette sitting cross-legged, eyes unblinking in the semi-darkness. Anna tensed, but her body failed her. Weakness pressed her back onto the bedding. Takwai didn't move, just watched. He didn't approach, didn't disturb, didn't touch. His respectful silence was the strangest form of caring. The cabin smelled different. He smoked sage leaves and added pine bark to the fire to purify the air. He sang something barely audible in his own language. The rhythm of the words rocked the children like a mother's cradle. Anna watched him furtively. He was unlike anyone she knew. No words, no explanations, only actions. He caught rabbits with snares, gathered pine needles, cooked chowder. fetched firewood without being asked, and when the children cried, he quietly went to them, picked them up, and put them back down tenderly, as if they were his own. On the third evening, she sat by the fire, and there was a silence between them, not hostile, but deafening, like the first ice on a river. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You didn't ask who we were," she said finally. "You didn't ask what happened." "You'll tell me when you're ready," he replied. "The question is like a knife. I'm not here to wound." She nodded. Then she stared at the flames for a long time. "Husband died. Hunting. Suddenly. I was alone. I gave birth right here in this cabin, all by myself." Then the storm came. Takwai was silent. Then he said, "Your strength is like the root of an oak tree, invisible but strong." Anna looked away. Her eyes glittered. No one had ever talked about her like that. Never. That night they sat by the fire until a late hour. He told her of his life on the prairie, of his exile, of how he had once saved a raven that had followed him for several winters. She listened with bated breath. She laughed for the first time in a long time. The night passed quietly, for the first time in many days, without fear. And only the moon, looking out the window, knew that something more than survival had taken up residence in this cabin under the snow. Something that grew slowly, but strong. Night. Silence. Only the occasional crackling of logs and the breathing of sleeping children fills the hut. Anna is awake. She stares into the flames, and the fire calls her back to the days when everything was still alive. Her husband, Thomas, was not affectionate, but he was a pillar. He could not speak tenderly, but he knew how to build a house, catch fish, fix a roof. His hands were rough but reliable. She remembered how he'd silently pulled her out of the river when the ice broke, how he'd stood as a shield between her and an enraged bull. Not perfect, not soft, but hers. That day he went hunting. He said, "I'll be back in the morning. Keep the stove warm." But he didn't come back. She found it herself, at the edge of the clearing where footprints had dragged the body through the snow. The blood had already crusted around him. His face was calm, but his chest was cleaved with a blade. Not a beast, a man. Anna gritted her teeth, holding back tears. The fire danced, reflecting in her eyes. On the other side of the hut, in the semi-darkness, sat Takwai. He felt her pain as animals feel the approach of a thunderstorm. Without words, his own shadows were rising from the embers of the fire. He remembered his brother, the younger one, hot, always running ahead. Their hunts when they were kids. Their conversations around the campfire. Then the smoke. Horses. Gunshots. The white hunters mistook them for cattle thieves. The brother fell first, never uttering a cry. Takwai killed one. He escaped. But ever since, carried not only guilt, but a nick, a memory, pain. At that moment their souls, without touching, leaned toward each other, like two trees in a storm standing side by side. The silence between them was understanding. Anna looked up. He was looking at her too. "I thought the pain was going away," she whispered. "Known, brother. But it becomes a rock to stand on," he replied quietly. The night was quiet again, but now it was the silence not of loneliness, but of shared survival. The snow crunched the ground with a crisp crust. There was silence around the cabin, wary, pressing. Takwai returned from hunting with a rabbit in his hands. The children were laughing. Anna was just heating the stove. Suddenly, there was the snap of a branch outside. Too clear, too close. He froze. He listened. Another step, and a voice. "Well, guys, looks like the cabin's alive." 3 men emerged from the forest. Their gait was confident, their eyes predatory. The first was broad-shouldered, with thick stubble and a hunting knife on his belt. The second was as thin as a pole, with a Winchester in his hands. The third kept behind, young, but the malice in his eyes betrayed a rotten essence. "Where is Thomas?" the first one asked. "We didn't finish our business with him." Anna came to the threshold, holding the baby in her arms. Her face was pale, but she stood straight. "He's dead," she said. "He went hunting." Never came back. That's a shame, the stubbly one grinned. There's still a debt. We helped him build that cabin. He owed something. Go away, Takwai said quietly, appearing from around the corner. The three of them froze. Their eyes narrowed. Are the Indians running this place now? The skinny one hissed. Look at you, Anna. You found your comfort quickly. He took a step forward. The other raised his rifle. You don't have to, Takwai said. Who are you to tell me what to do? A moment, and everything exploded. Takwai darted away like a shadow. A knife flashed in his hand. The first attacker collapsed, clutching his shoulder. The second one fired, but the bullet went sideways, so fast Takwai was close by. A blow, and the gun flew into the snow. The third ran. Anna cried out, clutching the children to her chest. Blood stained the snow. One wounded man was squirming, the other lay unconscious. The wind howled harder. Takwai stood, breathing heavily. His gaze was not fierce, impassive, like a beast's. He was protective. Anna looked at him, not with horror, but with realization. This man had saved her, and not just from danger, from helplessness, from the silent fear that it was over. You, she whispered. Did you know they were coming? I saw fear in your eyes. Fear takes shape if you wait long enough. He turned to the wounded man. Go away. If you come back again, I won't let you live. They walked away, leaving trails and groans behind them. The third never came back. When all was quiet, Anna stepped closer. Her hand trembled. She touched his shoulder. Thank you. He didn't answer. He just nodded. For the first time, there was no wall, no fire between them. Only silence, but no longer a threat. Respect, and the beginning of something new. The snow began to thin. The wind no longer howled, but whispered. The days grew longer, and inside the hut there was a different kind of silence, not one of lurking fear, but of careful harmony. Several days passed after the attack. Takwai returned from hunting with a deer, and Anna came out to meet him, for the first time without hesitation. She looked straight into his eyes. You saved us, she said. I want to thank you, but I don't know how. He set the deer against the wall, nodded, and answered, You're alive. That's enough. In the evening, she undertook to teach him English words. That's the window, she said, pointing her finger. Oh, window, he repeated, wrinkling his forehead. And this? Bake. This is a spoon. It's a smile. He froze. A smile. She showed him, and he understood. Smile, he repeated, and the corners of his lips trembled for the first time. He responded by teaching her words in his language. Nitoa, for fire. Sakomi, mother. Apisto, life. They sat by the hearth, the children asleep, and their voices intertwined, quiet as trickles of smoke. At one point she pointed to the pendant around his neck. What's that? Spirit guard, he answered. Made from the bark and tooth of a wolf. Protects from evil. The next day he carved 2 amulets, small ones, one with a feather, the other with a coyote claw. For them, he said, holding it out. Let the spirits know that these are the children for whom I am responsible. Anna took the amulets with trepidation. She didn't believe in spirits, but at that moment she believed in something more, kindness, without words. He held out his hand to help her up. Their fingers touched. For the first time, not in battle, not in fear, not by accident. She didn't pull her hand away. On the contrary, she held it a moment longer. She looked at him and laughed softly. Smile, she said. He smiled too. Later, in the evening, when the children were asleep, he placed pebbles on the floor and began to draw circles. He explained that it was a ritual to strengthen the house. She watched, then asked him to teach her. He didn't respond with words, just moved her hand, gently, like a petal on water. The convergence was not a flash. It was like spring ice, melting slowly but inevitably. And in every look, every gesture, a connection was born. Deeper than words, clearer than fear. The snow began to melt rapidly. The hut, once covered in white, now stood on damp ground. The wind carried the scents of spring, and something else, Anxiety. Takwai came with the news. His eyes were hard. White. A detachment 5 miles away. Men with blue uniforms, guns, horses. They're looking for those who collaborate with the savages. Anna turned pale. But I didn't. I just... To them, you're with an Indian. That's enough. Silence. Deep. Suffocating. She held a baby in her arms, and the other slept in a cradle. Everything she loved was in this room, and everything that threatened was outside. Will they find us? She asked. Yeah, not today, but soon. He stepped closer, not touching, just standing next to him, like always. I can take you to my tribe, my people. You and the children will be safe. Anna was silent. It felt like the ground was slipping away from under her feet. Do you want me? She swallowed. To go away with you? With strangers? He didn't answer. He just looked at me, point blank, without pressure. And in that look was, you're not alone. The night before, the choice stretched, endlessly. The children were asleep. Takwai sat by the door, listening to the forest. Anna by the hearth, her eyes burning in the reflection of the flames. In this cabin she buried her husband. In this cabin she first laughed again. Here fear was born, and hope came again. She took a strand of wool and began to weave, not knowing why. Her fingers moved as if in a dream. With each knot, a decision. With each twist, a farewell. Toward morning, she walked over to the cradle. She watched her sons' faces. One was a carbon copy of Thomas. The other seemed to have inherited Takwai's look. The world wasn't the same anymore, but it still was. At dawn, she came out to him. He looked up and understood without words. She said, "We have no other way." He nodded. While she stowed her things, he stood outside, casting one last look at the cabin. His face was calm, but inside it was a storm. It's not every day you leave the shelter that has become home, and it's not every day the ghost of the past remains in that house. They walked out together, like two exiles who had lost everything but each other. They left the hut at dawn, a bundle of blankets over their shoulders, their children on their chests. Anna walked with clenched teeth. Takwai was ahead, like a shadow, pushing the bushes apart, checking for tracks. It wasn't just the cabin behind them. There was an old life buried in the snow. The path was heavy. The spring sun was melting the ground, and the mud clung to their feet like the past, unwilling to let go. They walked in silence, saving their breath. Sometimes Anna sang softly, almost in a whisper, just to keep the children from crying. On the third day, one of the twins, Jake, started coughing, lightly at first, then deeper. His eyes darkened, his cheeks flushed with fever. They stopped at the foot of the rocks. Takwai knew the cave. It was where the water dripped from the rocks, where the moss was warm even on a cold night. He built a fire. Anna wrapped the baby in furs, changing rags, wetting her lips. Panic burst forth, but she held it back. No longer the woman who trembled at the door. Now she was a wolf mother. Takwai stepped out onto the cliff. He raised his hands to the sky. He sang, not loudly, but with the power that only those who no longer rely on humans pray with. He returned to the fire and handed her a pouch of warm decoction from the roots. For the spirit, he will fight. Anna looked at him, and for the first time she realized he wasn't just guarding her. He cares. He's with her. The night passed in anxiety. In the morning, Jake breathed easier. His cheeks were rosy. Anna cried for the first time in weeks for relief. Takwai silently placed his hand on her shoulder. She covered it with hers, without fear, without question. The journey continued. He walked slower now, so that she would not lag behind. He showed her where the berries were, where the stream was, where to leave the children while they gathered brushwood. They were laughing when one of the babies grabbed Takwai by the hair. He mimed surprise, and Anna laughed so hard it echoed in the rocks. On the 5th day they saw smoke, the camp of his people. In the distance, tents, children's laughter, the smell of meat. Anna stopped. Her heart clenched. Would she, a white woman, be accepted? Would she be understood? Takuai turned around. "You're with them. You're not alone." She nodded. As they entered the camp, the people looked on warily, but without hostility. One elder walked over, looked at the children, then at her, smiled. He held out a piece of wild grain bread. Anna took it, and suddenly she realized they had made it, and not just on the ground, but in ourselves. It's been a few months. The winter ice had melted. The meadows were filled with flowers, and the air was fresh and clean, like a promise of new life. The time of year when nature wakes up again, and with it, the heart. Anna sat in the shade under a tree, weaving baskets. The children were playing nearby. They had already become like that, with local features, with clear eyes that looked at the world with wonder. One blue, like her father's eyes, the others dark, like Takuai's. In their laughter is not only the memory of the past, but the power of the new. Takuai was there for her, as always. His presence was calm, strong, almost intangible, but like air to her. Sometimes he would silently come over and help with the weaving, gave her some new roots to work on, or brought her fresh berries. There was respect and care in his eyes. They no longer spoke of the past. It was gone, part of the land covered with grass and flowers. Their future was not in words. It was in what they did together. It was in how they supported each other, how they built a new life from the pieces of the old. One day, as the children were returning from the field, Anna stood on the edge of the hill and looked out over the vast expanse. Behind her stood Takuai. She sensed his presence, then turned and looked at him, the man who had become her support and her guiding star. He gave her his hand in silence. She took it, and their gazes met. There were no words, no need. They knew that everything they needed was already here, in this world, in this life. As they looked across the plain, they saw only one thing, the beginning. Together they stood, while the sun slipped towards sunset. The blooming land, the green hills glowing in the warm rays, all this had become their home. In that moment, there was no past for them. There was only the future, and it belonged to them.